Hello, hello. Thank you and welcome back to our weekly live YouTube Q&A session. What I'm going to do from this week is start a new series. We'll see how long it takes, how many sessions we'll give it. I'm uncertain how many parts we'll do, but I'm sure it'll be multi-part. And the topic for the sessions will be how to read a reading, which I think is a catchy little title. But it's a very, very important topic. But mostly when we do Q&A sessions, you guys will ask me questions about things like what's Saturn in this nakshatra in this house mean if it's conjunct with this, or what's an aspect from this and this and this. So mostly what you're asking me is questions about how to read a chart. So it's a little bit like a patient asking a doctor how to perform a surgery. The questions that I usually get. But it's better for the patient to ask the doctor questions about how to take the medicine and things like that, right? Things that they can actually control, things that they actually can do themselves. So I thought I should do this topic. I thought we should cover this topic to encourage you to think about and ask questions on this topic. How do you not read your charts, but how do you read your readings? In other words, how do you get information from astrology? Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattva darshinaha. Arjuna asked Krishna in Gita how you get knowledge, how you get wisdom. Krishna didn't say read a book or read an astrology chart. He said find somebody that's got wisdom. Jnaninas, find somebody that's wise. And then pariprashna, ask a lot of questions. Pranipat, with a humble mood. Sevaya, and provide them with whatever they need to be able to answer your questions. So it's to get the most out of astrology, you don't need to interpret charts. You need to find somebody who knows how to interpret charts. But you still have work to do. Just because you go to I'm sure you can conceive of the fact that if you were to read the charts yourself, you'd have to do a lot of work to learn astrology, right? Well, even if you're going to go to an astrologer, you still have to do work. Even if you just eat food, you have to do work. Every relationship goes in two ways. I can cook for you, but I can't chew it for you. So every relationship involves some work on the part of the recipient and some work on the part of the giver. So you're going to have to participate in your reading. It's not just going to be downloaded like we're going to stick a matrix cable in the back of your head and just download all this information into your head with no effort from your part. So you have to actually have some talent or skill to be able to communicate with an astrologer, because astrologers are on a different wavelength too. So you have to figure out how to get on that wavelength also. All right, so that's what I want to talk about. I'll start off by saying there's essentially two ways to get a reading. Now I'm going to check the chat now. So write down something if there's something about what I said so far that you don't agree with, or you do agree with, or whatever, or you want to ask a question about. Write it down now. And the next section that I want to go into is I want to talk about, there's two basic ways that you could get a reading. But it's regardless of which way you get a reading, you have to make sure you know how to access that information that's in it. All right. So let me just check. I'll check the chat window now and see if you guys got anything you want me to address. So Peter's, oh yeah, good questions. So you guys also, you're just so eager to ask whatever question is on your mind. But I want you to ask questions about what I'm telling you, because I don't want to follow your mind around like a ping pong ball, because it's not so good for me, and it's also not good for you. If your mind was already taking you into great places, then you wouldn't need to be coming here looking for information. So try to follow my presentation and ask the questions about the things that I'm saying. But maybe I can also try to find out how your questions are related to my way in a way that might not immediately seem obvious. So let me see. How do you deal with takers in general? You give. You give according to your dharma and their dharma. You give according to what you have and are capable of giving and what they're capable of taking. Is the chart still okay if it's 1 minute off? What do you think? It's very okay if it's just 1 minute off. Okay. Sometimes that 1 minute is right on the cusp and makes a big deal. But what you're going to see with astrology is you got people love to be really nitpicky and technical and get into like really fine details, but they don't even know the basics. It's like, this is a terrible example, but imagine if you, this is a bad example, but just take it funny. Okay, it's a funny example. Imagine if you were like 98-year-old woman, all your hair was falling out, your teeth were falling out, and you're asking your friends about what kind of high heel shoes you should wear. So it's like, yeah, one pair of the shoes is better than another pair of shoes, but it really makes no difference because you haven't gotten the main thing right. You see? So that's how it is with this stuff, all the nitpicking details in astrology, even to the point of Ayanamsha, which Ayanamsha is better than the other one. If the chart is 1 minute wrong or 2 minutes wrong, how different is it really? It's, yes, technically speaking, it's quite different, but practically speaking, there's much bigger things to get right first. So it doesn't make that much difference. Debbie asked, how long did it take you to confidently understand reading a chart and how the planet works? I said this, I answered this once before, is that it's going to be different for different people because different people have been studying these things in the past lives to different extents. Same way, like one person can pick up a guitar and play it in 3 days, another person can pick up a guitar and after trying for 3 years still not really be that good. So in the same way, some people can pick up astrology quick, some not quick. For me, it was quick. For me, it was like confident. How confident? Confident enough to start reading charts for other people. It was about 6 or 7 months, which is very fast. I would usually say you should go 1 to 2 years. If you follow Vedic astrologer, that is learning. Okay, hang on. All right, so I'm going to stop following the questions because they're not on the point of the thing, and I want to proceed on the point. But here's one. Odatana, he or she gave a follow-up to the first question. How do you stay humble with the takers? Giving without becoming a doormat. That's why I said you give according to dharma. You give according to what you're capable of giving, not more, not less. And you give according to what they're capable of receiving, not more, not less. Okay? So you have to give with intelligence, and if that intelligence isn't there, then you just give according to duty. Right? So take your time with this. This is the first thing. This is the first lesson. How to read a reading. You should take a deep breath. You should put down your cell phone. You should calm down. That's the first bit of advice for how to read your reading, because it is not a microwave dinner. And it's not going to be an instant download of enlightenment. You should be patient. These are deep details, deep imagery, and deep things are being revealed, and it's going to take you some time to comprehend it properly. Reading through a reading once or listening to a reading once with half concentration is not going to really get you the most out of the reading. So that's the first thing. So even the same way that you're approaching this live session right now, calm down, chill out, take a deep breath, put down your phones. Don't worry about the questions that you already had on your mind and that you're worried about yesterday and tomorrow. Think about what's going on right now. Think about what I'm saying. And ask questions about that. Focus. That's very important for ingesting any form of knowledge, is that you focus on it. So that's point one, is be ready to just meditate on your information that you're getting from the reading. Be ready to take a while to sit with it and think about it and discipline your mind enough to forget about the other things and the preconceptions. Okay? So there's two basic forms of a reading. Your reading, you can either be in person or like talking like a conversation with the person, or you might get a reading in a written form. These days, because of email, internet, and so forth, it's more and more common to get it in a written form. So, regardless of, people will say, well, they're quite different. If you're getting a reading in person or if you're getting it in a written form, it's quite different. And yes, they're different. They certainly are different. But none of the principles that we're going to talk about in this series are going to not apply to both. Like, it's not that you have to calm down and chill out and be ready to, be deep and concentrate and focus your mind only if it's a written reading. But if it's a conversational, you can just like go to Starbucks at the same time as you're listening to your astrologer. The same principles will apply to both. It doesn't matter if the person is speaking to you directly face to face or if you're reading something that they've written. Okay. All right. So now let's start to talk about what you're going to get when you get a reading. The first thing that you're going to get, almost certainly every time, is a chart. Right? So you're not going to be the one interpreting the chart, but you do want to be able to follow along with the chart, because otherwise you won't be able to remember the things as well that the astrologer says. If you think about how the brain works and how language works, and you think about how nouns work. Nouns are names for things. Names are very important. When a thing has no name, it's very difficult to conceive of it and to hold it in your mind and remember it. When a thing has a name, it's easier to remember. So, all the things that are in a chart are nouns. If there are little symbols that give you a handle for remembering some bit of information that you're going to be given in a reading. So you do want to be able to look at a chart and not just see a blur of scribbles. So although you don't have to be able to be a pro with reading a chart, you shouldn't be completely illiterate about how the chart is built, what it's showing you. So let me show you some examples of a chart, and let's talk about the basic things that you want to look at in there, the things that you want to be able to see. Okay? So what I'll do is I will, for the whole series, I'll give you examples of the type of reading that I give. So now there's also another two types of readings. Yeah, there's a reading which is, like I said, there's two types, in person or written, but also there's two types of written readings. There's a written reading where the person is conversing with you, but it's just in a written form. And the other one is where it's a prepared reading. Like a report. Generally, those are called reports. So what I'm going to do, you have to do the most work with a report. You'll have to do the least amount of work with a conversation. Because if the astrologer is any good in communication, they'll be able to look in your face and see when you're understanding things and when you're drifting off into space, and then start to clarify. That can't be done when it's written. So you have to do more work when it's written to make sure that you're concentrating and getting the ideas right. And you're going to have to do the most amount of work if it's a report format, which is where it's not responding to something specific that you've asked, and it's also not... There's a couple of things which we'll go over in the series that it's not capable to do. A report is not capable of doing certain things, which are very important. The synthesis of the meta synthesis of that happens in an astrology chart, it's impossible to do in a report. That kind of reading, what a report does is it tells you all the details. And a good report will be able to point you to how to synthesize the details. But there's too many possible syntheses for a report to be able to cover them all. So let's look at a report then, because that would be since that's the most difficult to get full information from. Let's look at it and see how to get full information from a report. So for this series, I'll be showing you the reports that I do for people. These are called the guided tour of your birth chart. Yeah. So as you can see, like the first thing that you get in a report, first thing that you get in any reading, even if you go talk to a person face to face, the thing they put on the desk in front of you is a chart. And your chart might look differently depending on who you go to. Right? If you go to somebody that practices like a North Indian lineage of astrology, they might draw you something like this. You might not be familiar with this. You might be familiar with a different style. So those are some barriers to entry. What I do in my report is give you a bunch of different styles. I'll also give you a circular style. Let's see if I can show you that. At the end, I give it in different formats. Okay, so for example, like I give a nakshatra wheel, a different way of looking at the chart. And I give other wheels at the end. But let's just look at this chart and talk about some of the things that it has in it. Okay? The kind of stuff that you actually need to be able to see when you look at something like this. What you need to be able to see is that there are squares and squiggles. And some of the squiggles are small and some of the squiggles are big, right? Let's look at this. Squares means like triangles, diamonds. So here's a square, this one up here, and it's got a squiggle in it, a small squiggle. Now, depending on the type of astrologer, they'll draw the squiggle differently. Somebody might write a 10 there because it would mean the 10th sign. Somebody might put that VS symbol there, which is the makara, the crocodile shark, which is the Capricorn. This is a symbol for Capricorn. Depending on the type of astrology, you'll get a different kind of squiggle. Somebody might write the word Capricorn. But you get a notification of what the sign is here in this box. This box represents a house because it's the one that's on top. It's the first house. And then it's got a squiggle in it saying this first house is Capricorn. Now there, you're going to also get a different chart depending on the system the astrologer uses. If the astrologer is using a whole sign house system, it'll look like this. The whole sign just defines the house. If the astrologer is using a dynamic house system, then you're going to get a different looking chart. So you're going to have to figure out how to read this particular chart that the astrologer is giving you. Right, so I'll show you the way that I do it, but you may have to get used to whatever it is that the particular astrologer has given you. Take the time to get used to it, whatever it takes. If it takes a day, if it takes an hour, get comfortable enough with the chart that you've been given so that if the astrologer says something in your reading about a first house, you can look at the chart and see where the first house is. And be comfortable enough with whatever type of symbols, glyphs the astrologer is using. You see here is the 10th house. This small squiggle indicates that it's Libra. The big squiggle indicates that Jupiter occupies it. And the number 28 indicates that Jupiter is at 28 degrees of Libra. So somebody might draw that differently on a wheel. Somebody might put JU. Somebody might draw a Devanagari J, or put a Ju for Jupiter. Different ways of describing the same information, but whatever it is that you've got, get used to it so that when the astrologer starts talking about your 10th house, you can go over there and quickly just eyeball your 10th house and get refreshed about the meaning of what's there. All right? So what you should be able to do is you should be able to say, all right, I'm familiar enough with this chart. And what I do is I give you a little text here to help you get started. All right, so you see, like I say, the small symbols show the sign that defines each house. This little squiggle means Capricorn. The big symbol show the planets. This one means the sun. So then you can see the sun is in Leo, and then here's the way the houses are numbered. All right. So that's the first bit. Get comfortable enough with the chart. Not that you can make your interpretations of it, but that you know what's the first house, what's an eighth house, what this squiggle means, what that squiggle means. You might got a chart. You might have a chart with aspects drawn in it. Get familiar with those kind of symbols are. Whatever the chart that you're given, before you go digging into the reading, make sure that you can at least make some sense out of the grammar that's depicted in that chart. Any questions so far about this? Not about your grandma? God, you guys just want to ask your own questions. What if several astrologers give totally different? Thank you, Annalena Rosario. Yeah, let's see. Gita wants to know if I place more emphasis on the ascendant or the ruling planet. So again, you're asking me how to perform a surgery. What I want to talk about in this series is how to take your medicine. But maybe you're not. Maybe you're asking me about how you should read the thing. Put more emphasis on the ascendant or the ruling planet. See what the astrologer says. If you're just dealing with a written report, you're going to have to figure it out yourself. That's why I'm saying, especially if it's just like a real spit out from a computer report that just gives you the list facts, then you're going to have to do tons of work. Generally, the ascendant degree and the planet that rules the ascendant degree should be taken as equally important. But I would say a little bit more on the ascendant. Debbie mentions that she thinks the written form of a reading can benefit with learning more. Yeah, it can. Depends. Every person has a different kind of attitude and a different way that they relate to. Some people really hate written words, so written form would be lousy for them. A very important thing with a spoken reading is make sure you get it recorded. Make sure you get a recording of it so that you can go back and listen to it again. And generally, spoken readings should have some kind of written component to them as well, like they should at least give you a chart. Let's see what else we got. Floating Wisdom wants to know if you get several astrologers giving totally different readings. This is the other thing, too, about how to read a reading. You probably want to... do you just marry the first person that you meet? Is that how it goes? Or you just marry one person and then you don't like it, and then you get divorced and you marry somebody else, and that one doesn't work out so well and you marry somebody else? Is that the best way to deal with marriage? What is a marriage? It's a partnership between two people. So why don't you apply the same seriousness to any type of partnership that you would do, especially a significant one where you're asking somebody to guide your life or inform you about who you are? I don't really advise going to many different astrologers. Why would you go to many different astrologers? Do you go to many different doctors? For the same thing? Do you go to many different foot doctors when you break your foot? You kind of look for one that's got some reputable thing, and you go there. Or if you go to one and he really is awful, then you leave and you go to another one. Then when you find a good one, you stay with them, right? Trial and error. So, different astrologers will give different readings. Everybody gives different weather stations sometimes give different weather reports and weather forecasts. Different doctors give different diagnoses because there's many different ways of looking at one thing. Sometimes that's the beautiful thing in astrology is you can see what one person says about you, see what another person says about you. You're getting different people's... What that says more is about the subjectivity of the astrologer. So you want to find one whose subjectivity you find agreeable. The criteria for assessing an astrologer is probably something I should have mentioned in the beginning too then. The criteria for assessing what astrologer you should go to is you should find someone whose subjectivity, that means whose personality, whose outlook on life is agreeable to yours, that you like. You like that. Actually, this is described by Rupa Goswami, the criteria on which you should Yeah, the criteria on which you should seek a guide, he says Sajatiya, Ashraya, Snigdha. The first principle is Sajatiya, that they should to be somebody whose subjectivity matches yours. And the second one is Ashraya, they should be somebody who's capable. So that's another thing you should evaluate, though you may not be able to evaluate it too well if you are not too learned in astrology. But you can at least see, like, this person makes sense or not, or they're systematic, or they're consistent. So you want to try to find an astrologer who has the same kind of outlook on life that you like or want or have, somebody who demonstrates that they really know their stuff and is consistent, is intelligent. And Snigdha, somebody that you feel like is kind to you. You don't want to go to the aloof, cold guru, because they don't give a damn. You want to go to somebody who's Snigdha, warm, soft, cares about you. All right? So then if several different astrologers give totally different readings, that problem would be solved. You found an astrologer that meets your criteria for the person, and then stick with that astrologer. You can go and get some other viewpoints from other astrologers, but have one main astrologer at least. Let's see what else we got. Right. And Dorius is summarized it pretty well. With a written report, you're going to have to do most of the synthesis. And with my written report, I try to really guide you how to do it effectively, and I organize the report in such a way that you'll be getting the things in contextual order, in the right contextual order, based on the thing that the first idea that you get is the most important. So I worked pretty hard to make my report, make it as easy as possible for you to do the synthesis the right way, but we're still going to have to talk a lot about how you do synthesis. And one-on-one, in one-on-one consultations, the astrologer is going to do most of the synthesis for you. But you might not always be getting the best astrologer in the world. So rather than just waste your money with that astrologer, if you know how to do some of the synthesis yourself, you can actually correct it. I've done this with doctors sometimes too. Like, or sometimes or teacher or something, sometimes they might not give you the most accurate, best reading or information in the world, but they give you some hints and clues that you can actually synthesize to figure out what's going on. Prashant wants to know if birth chart rectification needs to be done. Again, I think a little bit maybe. If you see a chart that's particularly sensitive on, the ascendant degree is 0. But in most cases, no. Other people will tell you different. Maybe it's because they want to make money. Maybe it's because they want to have an excuse for why their reading wasn't as good as you wanted. Maybe it's because they're super, super, super great and they want everything to be exact detail. But if that's the case, then their reading should be 100% pinpoint for you after they do their birth chart rectification. So I think mostly it's a scam. Or what is that technique called, where the magician diverts your attention someplace else? It's one of those type of things, like all this glorification given to birth chart rectification. In some charts, it's going to be important to rectify the birth time if it's very sensitive on a large scale thing. But most of the time, no. If you're within 5 to 15 minutes, you're basically going to be the same. All right. What else do we got here? All right, so let's then continue. Where were we? Yeah, this particular chart is color-coded, Nancy. So what are those guys called? These are the squares. The angles are color-coded. This is to make it easier to spot an angle. The green, all the green houses are angular to each other. They're Kendra to each other. All the blue houses are Kendra. They're called Kendra. The second one is called Caden, and then Apocalypse. the different squares. So since a lot of the interpretation of a chart, you're going to look for squares between things. So I like to have the squares color coded. It's just something I did. All right, so we were saying, what were we talking about? Yes, that you need to be able to look at a chart and say, okay, I can see that this chart means Venus is in the ninth house with K2. That should be like that. You don't have to be able to tell me what that means, because you're not the astrologer, right? But you should be able to say, I see that I have Venus in the ninth house with K2 in Virgo. If my chart was a different format and I was doing a reading for you, you should be able to read whatever that format was, okay? So that you can keep pace with me roughly. Now, the next thing is, let's talk about the fundamental components of what's in a birth chart, okay? Therefore, what are the fundamental components of the stuff that's going to be interpreted in your reading? There are 3 fundamental components. Oh, this somehow got ugly looking. There we go. There are 3 fundamental components in any horoscope, in any astrology chart. I don't know, the Venus thing. It's Chitra, actually. I got to have everything perfectly set up. The 3 fundamental components, maybe 4 if you're doing Vedic or some forms of Western, but the 3 that you're going to get in every reading, no matter what astrologer you go to, are these 3 things. What do you think they are? What do you think the 3 fundamental components of a horoscope are? Think to yourself for a second. The 3 fundamental components of a horoscope. The most important one is the planets. Every horoscope is going to talk about planets. The second one is signs. Every horoscope is going to tell you that this planet is in that sign. Every birth chart is going to describe the placement of a planet in a sign. And the third one, you should probably know by now, is houses. So these are your 3 layers. So you should know a bit about what they are before you start to try to understand them. Get information from them. Have a reading based on them. You should know that these are the 3 players in my chart. Otherwise, it sounds like total Greek when the astrologer is talking. If the astrologer says you've got Venus in the ninth house Virgo, and you don't know what a house is, and you don't know what a sign is, and you don't know what a planet is, then it's just completely hot air, and you won't be able to hold on to that information in your mind because it has no meaning. So you should at least know that astrology involves planets, signs, and houses. 12 houses, 12 different signs, and mostly different astrologers will use different planets. The core are 7. There's 7 core planets. Then you get Rahu and Ketu added on. And some people use other stuff too. Even in Vedic astrology, you can use nodes of other planets. Or in modern astrology, they use outer planets, asteroids, things like that. But the core planets you need to know about are the 7. Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. You need to know those. You need to know the zodiac signs. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. Right? And then 12 houses. The whole chart is just a combination of a planet in a sign and a sign forming a house. The signs form a house. The signs form the house depending on how they relate to the earth. So the earth makes a visual reference point by its horizon. Okay? What the relationship of the zodiac signs to the horizon is what creates the houses. The signs will form a house based on how they relate to the horizon. So, for example, this chart, it's got Cancer up, it's got Capricorn up there in the top, right? So that means that when this person was born, Capricorn was on the horizon, the eastern horizon. What degree of Capricorn? Look carefully at the chart. It tells you 25 degrees of Capricorn was on the horizon when this dude was born. And so that means that Capricorn forms the first house. That's the first section of the sky. The next sign, Aquarius, forms the next house, the second house. The next sign, Pisces, forms the next house, the third house, and so on. So the signs form the houses by their relationship to the eastern horizon. And then the planets are in the signs and moving through them. So here you got a notation that this little headphone set, Rahu is the north node. The headphones point up, northward. Rahu is in Pisces. Pisces is the third sign from the horizon. So Pisces is the third house. So here you go. You got information that Rahu is in Pisces in the third house. That's how you read it. That's how you read the sentences of the chart is speaking. You might not know the meaning yet, but you can read the sentences now. Here you can say, oh, look, here's a squiggly mark for Saturn. Saturn is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's in the fifth house, Taurus. Saturn is in Taurus, which is the fifth sign from Capricorn. Capricorn is rising. So Saturn is in the fifth house, Taurus, at 21 degrees. Any questions about this, the basics of what's involved in a chart, and how do you read the sentences that are visually depicted by a chart? Let me see if you got any questions about that. This is fun, by the way. I think this is really good stuff for you guys. At least now everybody will get a grounding. Let's see if you guys can stick with the grounding. Maria mentioned nakshatras. That's the fourth one. All right. Depending on your astrologer, you will definitely have these three. You will definitely always have planets, houses, and signs, because that's the basis of what we call horoscope. The reason why it's called horoscope is because scope means see and hora means the hour. So you can see the hour by the relation of the sun to the eastern horizon. So by looking towards the eastern horizon and its relationship to the planets and signs, you can see the hora, the hour. So it's a Greek word, horoscope. It means the chart that shows you, that is hourly dependent. It's time-sensitive chart is a horoscope. Any kind of all of the birth chart interpretation that we do in any form of astrology these days, besides Chinese, is horoscopic. So it's always going to have those. Any horoscopic astrology, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, is going to have those three components. There's another fourth one that's becoming more popular these days. It's having a resurgence. It was very important in the ancient times, and it's having a resurgence nowadays. It will be the nakshatra, or in Western astrology they call it lunar mansion. And that's the position of the moon relative to the stars. Floating Wisdom asks, can you use your reading just using nakshatras? That would be a nakshatra reading. So it wouldn't be a horoscopic reading. But it's another way to do a reading. And yes, it's going to be awesome. And yes, I'm going to make a report that does exactly that. How important is Rahu? Very important, otherwise we wouldn't include it. Cosmic Bliss, what would be a good book for Western mind to get started on learning these basics of astrology? There's a book by a cool dude named Victor Kara, which is called Beautifully Rational Philosophy of Astrology. And there's another book by that same dude called Radically Deep Fundamentals of Astrology. Those are the best two books that you can read on astrology. Nancy, let's see, I get... FC Mata says, I thought you give more importance to nakshatra. I give a lot of importance to nakshatra, but I'm just showing you the fundamentals that you'll get from any reading. And if you give only importance to nakshatras, you're going to lose some stuff. Like you're going to lose houses, which is really important. So the best thing to do is to combine your nakshatras reading with your horoscopic reading. Debbie says, I think in slower moving planets, the houses are more important because a long transit can cover more than one. So yeah, there's slower moving planets and quicker planets. Actually, in a birth chart, the quicker the planet, the more important it is. But in a transit, the slower the planet, the more important it is. Because the birth chart is a picture of a moment, but the transit takes account for things happening over time. Nancy wants to know, when do we start looking at degrees in a chart? When you want to start doing some fine details, especially when you want to think about aspects and subdivisions. Cosmic Bliss, do you look at to the Ascendant to get an idea of a person's life path? Let's look at that soon, about what we're going to do with the Ascendant. Probably in next week. We'll talk about what the Ascendant does, but maybe this week. But just to give you a heads up, the Ascendant is going to give you it's a very important part of you getting your first impression of what you're dealing with. Debbie, this is my chart. Here, Debbie. So here's a good example to see if you can read the sentences that this chart portrays. Right? Debbie asked, what's your sun? Ascendant, right? Moon. So you should be able to see it from the chart now. You should be able to see, okay, this guy's got a Capricorn ascendant. That should just like be as easy for you to read the apple is red. You should be able to look at this chart and see Capricorn ascendant, Gemini moon, Leo sun, right? And you should also be able to read, like the cow jumped over the moon. It should be that easier for you to say Capricorn ascendant, moon in Gemini 8th house, sun in Leo, moon in Gemini 6th house, sun in Leo 8th house. But how do you find nakshatras? Let's talk about that. But the astrologer, if you're going to a Vedic astrologer, the astrologer should be telling you what the nakshatras are. So you shouldn't be having to do that kind of surgery. The astrologer should prepare the chart for you. That's part of what being an astrologer is, right? So you shouldn't have to find nakshatras. If you're thinking about on this chart, how do we see nakshatras? You don't. But then the astrologer named Victor Kara gives them to you right here on a special wheel, just the nakshatra wheel. And then I also give you another wheel where you have the nakshatras with the rashis and the navamshas. Ascendant has a huge impact on the physicality of the person, but it's not the only thing that affects the physicality. Nancy, you love the colors. All right. So let's see what we've said so far. What we've said so far is you need to participate in your reading. So you need to do some work to digest the information. So you need to, first of all, find an astrologer who is easy to digest for you, whom you trust, who is easy to digest, and who cares about you, right? Now, of course, they're not your mom or your dad. They're not going to care about you like the way they care about their own kids. But they shouldn't just be out to make money. They should actually have some compassion and care about you, okay? So if you feel that this astrologer actually gives a damn about me, like, for example, if you send them an email about some important thing, like you made a mistake in my report and they just never reply to you, then you should just write that person off. Or give them a few chances. Maybe they didn't get the email. Maybe I got caught in a spam filter. But you know what I'm saying? Like, if you detect that this person doesn't really care about me, then forget that person as anybody, whoever it should be in your life. That person shouldn't be in your life. So pick your astrologer by the person that you can easily understand, who you trust, and who actually gives a damn. And then learn how to be patient. That's the second thing we said, right? Remember that you need to be patient. You need to be taking in information. So you're going to be in a pensive mood when you deal with your reading. Third thing is be able to at least understand the grammar of the chart so that you can see what the astrologer is talking about when they say something like, you've got Jupiter in the 10th house in Libra. It makes sense to you. You know what a house is. You should know what a house is. A house is the relationship of the signs to the earth. The 10th house, in my system, in a whole sign system, which is the classical old system, the 10th house is the 10th sign from the Ascendant. And where is it? You know a little bit about what the houses are. That's why I say that everybody should probably take a course on what the planets represent, what the houses represent, what the signs represent. It will help you immensely. Even if you're not going to be an astrologer, don't waste your time asking specific questions about what this aspect on this planet and this nakshatra does, but you should ask, what does the moon really signify? What does the sun really signify? What does the 4th house really signify, etc.? That's valuable information. If you really know what your planets signify, what the planets signify, what the houses signify, what the signs signify, then that shorthand, quick stuff that astrologers say will have a lot more meaning enriched to you. Like when an astrologer says you got Venus in the 9th house with Ketu, if you know Venus, Ketu, 9th house, Virgo, you already are getting information from it. But if you don't know anything about those things, you get nothing. And if you got messed up information, because you're listening to 55,000 different people tell you 55,000 different things about what Venus signifies, what Ketu signifies, and all that, and you never learned it in a systematic way that actually makes sense, then you're going to get garbled information. And that's what I see 90% of the time, garbled information. Chaotic thinking. Because there's no clarity. So take your time to learn what a house is, what a planet is, what each individual planet is, what each individual house is, before you really jump in and try to dive into your chart. All right? So let's see. We got 10 more minutes. Let's go on to the next principle. And just see if anybody asked any other question. No more like on-topic questions. So let's go to the next principle. Here in this chart, see, this is for me, and here's my birth time. Here, the first thing that I give you in my report is a short version of the thing that I'm trying to do right now in this video series. Teach you how to read a reading, right? So what I present here in this section is that there's there's two really, really important things. Yeah, actually, so that you don't get too chaotic, let me switch back to this and tell you about this first. If I could give you one bit of advice, that if you only remember this from the session, your access to astrology is going to improve dramatically, it's this. Don't isolate your interpretations. Everybody knows how ridiculous things can be taken out of context, right? You can just take words out of context from a person and edit them together and make them say hysterical things. So taking things out of context, any kind of symbol that has a meaning, like a word, anything like that, a gesture, taking it out of context can be hysterical and completely different than what it was really supposed to mean, right? The same thing is very, very, very true in reading an astrology chart. Never take anything out of context. This is the key that you have to understand about not just reading a chart, but reading a reading, getting a reading. Even if it's face-to-face and the astrologer is talking to you, and all of a sudden the astrologer says, well, Venus in the 1st house represents beauty, physical beauty. And then you may get stuck on that and say, well, why do I have a wart on my nose? This guy, it makes no sense. This doesn't resonate with me. This reading is wrong. I'm losing faith in this astrologer. They said that Venus in the 1st house represents beauty, but I'm an ugly witch and I got a wart on my nose. So what the problem that you've put yourself into there is you just fixated on one thing and thought that this one thing should define everything about you. That's why I hate those questions where people come and say, I have this planet and this sign. Tell me about me. I have Jupiter aspected by Mars. What does it mean? Because I know for sure that what does it mean thing doesn't mean what does it mean. It means tell me about me. Right? And I cannot tell you about you just by knowing that Jupiter and and Mars are conjunct or something. I can tell you about Jupiter and Mars conjunct, but you have there's a lot more work that goes into astrology to be able to tell if that's going to be accurate or not. For you. Why? Because Jupiter and Mars conjunction exists in different contexts. Just like the word cool exists in different contexts of different sentences, the planet Saturn can exist in different contexts. Saturn in the first house, what does it mean? Well, it depends what sign it's in. Okay, then you tell me the sign. Well, it depends where the first lord is. There's all kinds of things. So instead of just trying to chase it all around, just sit down calmly and say, okay, I am going to need to digest a lot of information and synthesize a lot of information. Accept that fact first, that you're not going to get a one-sentence thing that's going to tell you everything that you need to know. You're going to have to synthesize a lot of information. If it's a one-to-one reading, hopefully the astrologer can do most of it, but you can still fall into the pitfall of taking one of their statements out of context. If it's a report, you can easily fall into the pitfall, especially if the person who created the report hasn't really given some thought to this, and they just they spit out anything first. It might be totally the least relevant thing in your chart, but this particular report may have put it out first and gives you the totally wrong impression. So context is extremely important in understanding a chart and understanding anything that an astrologer tells you about your chart. By context, I mean, Venus in the first house means physical beauty, but Saturn aspecting the first lord means physical ugliness. Or Saturn in the second house means I got something wrong with my face. There's something less than desirable about my face. So I got both of those in my chart. So the context has to balance out. So you're going to have to put, but Moon and Rohini means I'm gorgeous. Yeah, but something else means I'm ugly. So, or in this way, in this house, in that sign. And when you finally get all the context ironed out, you can figure out why you have a wart on your nose and not your shoulder. If you're patient and you sit there and you let it sink in and you sort everything out. So with that being said, let me give you the most important rules for figuring out context. Let me just give me a heads up if you understand what I'm talking about or not. Give me a yes, sir, or something, if you understand. What astrologers do I recommend? Me? It's really irrelevant if I recommend an astrologer for you. I would recommend the astrologers that I feel I would go to, but you need to figure it out for yourself. All right, great. Everybody's on the page. Thanks, Ash. All right, thanks, everybody. So now here's the important rules, and we'll finish up with this one today. So the important rules here are, first of all, prioritization of the context. You have to prioritize things. So there's going to be some things that are less prominent than other things. It's going to be difficult for you to figure out which part of your chart is more prominent than the others because you're not a professional astrologer. If you have a good astrologer, then you're lucky, or you've done good research, and that astrologer is going to get the prioritization accurate and is going to explain it to you in a prioritized way. So that's what I tried to do with my report, with my written report. It's not just a cookie cutter spit out report. This report the whole thing is based on analyzing what's more prominent than the other thing in the chart and ordering the information in that order so that you get the most important contextual things first, and then you fill in details later. Right? So the concept of context means with some other words. So you're going to have to understand how one thing that the astrologer says or that the chart says sits with the other things that the report or the astrologer says or the chart says. And you'll go crazy trying to do that if you have the impression that they all have equal weights. You have to be able to figure out the weight of a statement. Like usually when you're doing conversation or reading or something like that, the thing that the person says with more volume, the thing that the person says more frequently, the thing that the person says more emphatically, the thing that the person says at the beginning and at the end. These are things that cue you into these statements have more weight. The other statements are just refinements of this. So I have a detailed mathematical system for figuring out the chart, reading the chart in that way. At the end of the reading, I give you some of the mathematical details of it at the end of the report. So you can see what goes into figuring that out. I'll give you a heads up, like look at this graph. Here it is. So this graph is the end result of a lot of math to compute what planet's more prominent than the other. And this also includes what planet's more positive than the other. But you can see the taller the bar, the more prominent the planet. So if you go back and look back at this chart, it's not impossible to have eyeballed. It's not unlikely that you would have eyeballed that Jupiter in the 10th house all by itself is the most prominent planet in this chart. But there's a lot more that actually goes into the calculation than that. It just so happens that in this particular chart, it's pretty easy to determine that Jupiter is the most prominent planet. So anyway, in every report that I give this graph. And not only do I give this graph, then the report's going to be organized around this principle. That the statements that Jupiter makes in your chart are more important than the statements that Mars makes. Because Jupiter is way more prominent than Mars. So sure enough, the first planet that I'm going to talk about after I go through the yogas is going to be Jupiter. I'm going to start with Jupiter and go in that order. So you want to remember that when you are, even if you're listening face-to-face with an astrologer, or if you're reading this particular report, you're going to remember that no single thing that the astrologer says is the complete picture. But no single interpretation that the astrologer gives you. Maybe that astrologer will actually give you a complete picture at the end as best as they can. But it's the way that all of the statements sit together, and you need to figure out which ones are getting more weight, which ones are more important than the others. So that's the first rule, is to look for the context. And then next week I'll tell you the second rule, which is the rule of resonance. Let's see if you got any final questions for this Q&A. Got any last questions? If something that I've said doesn't make sense, let me know. Thank you, Raphael. Neil Stevens, you got this Sudarshan Chakra technique. I'll talk about that eventually too, which is even a further synthesis of 3 charts into one. Thank you, Cosmic Bliss. Cosmic Bliss wants to know if I will use Lahiri. No. I'm not like gonna... No, actually, I don't. And if you don't like that about me, then I'm not the right astrologer for you, because I don't trust that sidereal zodiacs are the best way to get information from people. Floating Wisdom says, do you ever hold back from telling someone something bad that you as an astrologer might see in a chart? Not exactly. But I have to figure out that the astrologer has to, and this is important. I'll tell you what the astrologer has to do, and then I'll also tell you what you have to do from the other side of the coin. What the astrologer has to do to be a good astrologer is not hide difficult things that they see, but figure out how to introduce the person to this difficult information in a positive way, in a way that shows them, because you have to have the right concept of reality. That reality is, there is no such thing as Satan, and there is no such thing as a bad guy who's fighting with the good guy. And it's just a good guy and a mom. That's all. The kids make up stories about monsters, and they get angry at parents who discipline them. And they think that the discipline is a bad thing. But the truth is that it's not. There is no such thing as a bad thing. So what an astrologer needs to do is to figure out how to make the person understand that about this thing which is difficult. There are things which are difficult, but not bad. So how do you present this information in a way that this person will actually benefit and improve their lives from it? You don't need to hide it, but you need to figure out that. So now you, as a recipient of a reading, you should listen in that way too, because the astrologer might not always do that perfectly. They might not know you well enough to know exactly the right way to present the information to you, etc., or they just might not be a perfect person. Gosh. So you should also listen with that kind of ear. All right, this guy just told me that, and this guy just told me I'm never going to have kids. All right, so how do I deal with that information in a positive way? How do I deal with that? How can I, let that inform my life in a way that I'm going to move in a positive direction with this? If they just dumped it on your lap and didn't tell you. Right? And that can happen more easily in a written report. Because written reports will spit out a lot of raw information. Not a written report, but like a report. Not a face-to-face or a personal reading, but a report. They're going to spit out a lot of information. So if you're very sensitive to hearing something bad, you're going to find something bad for sure, because some of the raw information about, like Saturn and Aries, you're going to find bad stuff written. So you need to make sure that you're applying the rule of context, and you also need to make sure that you're listening with the ear of, this is not a bad universe created by a devil. This is a universe of my mother. My mother made this universe. So how can I benefit from the lessons that she's teaching me? Let's see what else we got. Atmakarika, I don't use. It's not part of the system that I use. If you're not sure about the correct birth time, it really doesn't matter too much. Still, you can just use your 12 houses and stuff like that. You will be surprised. If you sit still, calm down, and do your reading correctly, you will get so much information from just this planet and this sign. You won't need to learn about this new crazy techniques and all these amazing things. You'll get tons of really useful information from very basic things if you do it properly. So you don't really have to stress about your exactly to the second birth time. If your birth time is right on the border of some major change of a nakshatra or a sign, then you should put some effort into getting it rectified. If you absolutely don't even know your birth time at all, then what you can do is just go with the moon chart and ignore the ascendant chart. Let's see what else we got. I hate when YouTube makes this thing scroll. What do I think about gems in astrology? It's a random question, but I did a whole series on astrological remedies, therapies, techniques, and gems are not classically included. All right, so I'll end here because we're out of time. So, here's Patience says there's very, very awful things that happen in the world. So how can you say that nothing is bad? There are very, very awful things that happen in the world. I'm not saying that there aren't very, very awful things. But nothing is bad. The awful thing is awful, but there's nothing that's happening without a purpose. You might not believe in that. You might not be able to trust that. But that's your problem. You haven't figured out that the universe is in the hands. The universe is a kind mother. The universe punishes. Now, if it's impossible for you to see how somebody should be grossly mistreated, then think about the fact that there is a person who is grossly mistreating that person. Right? So, and then that's your answer for how somebody might deserve to be grossly mistreated. Does that mean that you should not care about all the mistreatments that go on in the world because it's all good? No. You should stop these people from suffering. Suffering is real. Suffering happens because people don't realize that the universe is good and they should participate in it harmoniously. You should participate in the universe harmoniously. That's why people harm other people, because they participate in the universe disharmoniously, because they think that the universe is not good and they should go against it. Because of the awful upbringing that they have, but this is all the momentum of karma. So, I've gone through terrible things in my life. People have gone through more terrible things that I've gone through in their life. There's nobody is saying that terrible things don't exist. But what we're saying is you need to figure out how to comprehend the terrible stuff in a way that will uplift you. All right? And I'm not going to chase around your anger. You may have had a very, very difficult thing, and you can believe what you want to believe, but I've explained the best I can explain. Kishan is angry, I think maybe because I maybe skipped a question. You can't be angry with me with that. There's too many questions, and YouTube scrolls the thing, and sometimes I just miss questions. And sometimes I don't feel your question was on point. So I'm not sure what your question was. I apologize that I didn't get to it. All right. So next week, we do this every week on this day at 5:30 Pacific time. So the same time as this week, we do it every week. So next week, we're going to go to part 2. I'm going to tell you about the rule of resonance, how to deal with the contextual things and the statements that appear to contradict each other. And then after that, we're going to start getting into some specific stuff, specific examples. Okay, so it's not just theory. All right, folks. So stay tuned for next week. Thank you.